Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Boswell Book Company virtual event series. It is day 4,201 of us being in business. I am Daniel Goldin, proprietor, as you see our author, and Jason Kennedy, our trade buyer and person of many different trades. We are so grateful to be having the opportunity to be hosting Natalie Zina Walschots. She is the author of Hench, which to my knowledge is her debut novel. No, she wrote a book called Thumbscrews, but that's a poetry book. And then she also wrote Doom, Love Poems for Supervillains. She also edited a book of Canadian essays, which I was very excited about. And she's also a game designer. And that seems to be a theme for the week because so was, I think, last night's author, Naomi Novik. So it's a trend. So as I said, tonight we've got Jason Kennedy, the Boswell buyer and manager. And basically we've just added to his job description, the super champion of the book, Hench. So with that said, let's get it started. Hi, everybody. So,
hello.
Hello.
Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for that intensely flattering introduction.
You're our dream, that's all.
Goodness.
Oh, yeah. Dream of everybody here. So we like to start off with just like if you were stuck in an elevator with somebody and you were giving them a quick rundown of your book, what's your book about?
Sure. So Hench is about, as the title may imply, the plight of hench people, the downtrodden and often disposable employees of supervillains. In particular, it's about a henchwoman named Anna, who is a sort of a data specialist who does a lot of boring things for a lot of very terrible people, a lot of which involve spreadsheets, which, you know, sort of should keep her out of the line of fire. But after she has a very unfortunate in-person run-in with a superhero, she starts to dig in more seriously to the cost that superheroism has on the communities that these people are ostensibly there to protect, and what she discovers is pretty terrible, which sort of embarks her on the second phase of her villainous career. So that's typically how I describe it. So it definitely is a pretty harsh indictment of a police state, while at the same time being quite funny.
Oh, very nice. And you can see just in that elevator pitch how I was able to convince so many people to read it on staff. It's a little bit of everything. Did you want to do the reading now, or did you want to?
Sure. Yeah. I can. So I had a request to maybe read a single piece from Doom, Love Poems for Supervillains, which is the book that I had written before Hench. I've not read from in a very long time, but this came out in 2012 to give you an idea of just how long the kind of like ideas about supervillainy have been percolating. But this was about the supervillains themselves before my brain kind of turned to the hench people, which, you know, probably I identified personally with more, but I've always kind of had a thing for villains. The very first poem in the book is called Doom. Mask. Grill work, rebuffed skin, bitten superconductor, data scatters toes to tens unit. My circuit shortens, gauntlet armed, my concave vice blasted, infrared, tatters tracked heat signature, what the alloy allows, jetpack, optical scan amplified, thrusters on high. So that's the kind of thing we have in here. It's very weird and very concerned with the like vocabulary of supervillainy, right? Like so there's a lot of words that are kind of like obsessed with like the gear and the superpowers, and, you know, lots of the sort of like villainous monologue takes a bit of center stage. But like it's really a book about like A, how hot villains are, and B, how cool the words we use to describe villains are.
Nice. I liked that a lot.
Thank you.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay, so talking, what I loved about the book is that especially in the beginning, the world's very normal feeling with Anna. She needs a job. She's a temp.
As we all do.
Exactly. And so what I really love is I love this sense of normalcy you have in grounding it into what like everybody's had the feelings of having to get a job and all this. And then you marry it with the fantastical, she's going in for the hench job. How did that come about? How did you come about wanting to, I mean, you've talked about liking the hench, like the villain side of things, especially with the poem there. But how did you like get to that where like you were gonna take it from somebody who's kind of on the outside of the villain superhero thing and going from the ground up?
So I've always found hench people to be like super interesting characters. If you think about them in kind of any superhero media, whether it's like a comic book or a film or like an animated TV show, there's always hench people around. They're usually not named beyond that title. Some terrible fate usually befalls them. But if you think about them as characters, like how they got to this place, they're instantly fascinating. It's like you all have very specific skills. You have somehow agreed to do this job where you have to wear a very stupid matching outfit, probably with your colleagues, where it's like, it's very dangerous. You may have like scripted lines you're meant to speak in response to your boss at like regular intervals. Like it's a bizarre job that comes with extremely intense risks, but obviously there's all these people who are willing to do it or who have been sort of pressed into service in some way. And when I thought about it for 30 seconds, like it's no different from a lot of the situations that we find ourselves in. Like I have done a lot of ridiculous jobs, and I think a lot of people have done a lot of ridiculous jobs, including ones that put them at great personal risk in lots of ways, often for like very little money. But like at the end of the day, you need food and rent. So it's not like it wasn't a very big leap to start for it to make sense why like a lot of people would actually take up henching, but also like it makes them fascinating characters. Like how did you get to this place? Like what happened in your life that you like started off as a like AAA hockey player, but like now you're in your like late 30s and your knees blown out, so you're like working for Victor Freeze, like I need to know what that arc is, right? Like what that narrative arc is. And kind of like eventually I realized that that was a story that I had to write, that waiting for it to appear was, futile, and that if I really wanted it in the world, I would have to put it out there.
Well, you actually, though, make a distinction between the muscle, the folks who do the basic, I don't know, everything from office work to, I don't know, evil design?
Evil graphic design. Like somebody's making those logos, and somebody's very talented at making those logos and like picking like, there's an awful lot of like skulls and sharp edges, sure, but you have to make like your skull and sharp edge logo like unique from everyone else's. And like can you imagine the color palettes that you would have to submit? Like here are like the top 5 fall villainous palettes. Like which of these really speaks to you? Like what font should we be putting on the villainous letterhead? These are real questions that someone would have to answer. And like that is fascinating. But I went a little bit sideways there, but there is a distinction in the book between like the meat, right? Who is sort of like the, what a lot of us, I think, sort of think of when you picture a hench person, right? Which is like the normal, unpowered people who like totally futilely fight the superhero before like the main, battle takes place between like the hero and the villain, who are probably being horrifically injured in the process because the fragile, squishy human body versus the like superheroic body is an inherently horrifying prospect. But there are a lot of other jobs that villains would need done. like evil graphic design. Like someone has to answer the phone. There are a lot of spreadsheets that have to be filled out. Someone is still processing HR. Like someone is doing your PR for you. Like there is, if for a supervillain to function the way they do in any like superhero story, these jobs are being done. Someone is doing them, and they're not just like, you know, the like long suffering second in command. Like there's a full staff there. And I'm, as you know, somebody who's worked a lot of those jobs on the real earth, I am super fascinated by those people and how they got there and what their stories are and what their skill sets are. And that's kind of ultimately where we spend most of the time, although there's definitely also a lot of, you know, folks whose job it is to be the muscle getting horrifically injured. Don't worry.
Jason, you,
Okay.
yep.
Oh yeah. I would imagine that working, you know, as for the villain as opposed to the superhero would be much more exciting, especially if you're trying to do a color palette.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the work would be more interesting, right? Like, I think the certainly
well,
in
obviously, you do.
more, yeah. Well, in the sort of like world I described, I think that like there is more creative freedom, I guess, on the villainous side, right? Like you kind of get to do your own thing a little bit more. It's a little bit less like structured as opposed to like, well, all of these superhero teams kind of have to fit together and there's more government oversight, right? So there it's a bit more boring and kind of like beige and gray in uniform.
Too corporate.
Too corporate, exactly. Whereas the villains are more startup-y, you know?
Yeah, exactly. What was it gonna?
I can go with one.
I'll go with one because I had a question and it just.
I'm sorry.
Okay, okay, first of all, Anna's a terrific character.
Thank you.
We just love her. How much every author says the same thing. I'm all the characters and I'm none of the characters, but in this case, of course, she's the hench person to a supervillain. So how much of Anna is in you, or did you base it on somebody else that you know?
I mean, I'm not Anna. Like that's definitely hasn't not been my life to varying degrees. I think I certainly put a lot of myself in her, and as the I think also in a symbiotic way, like I have spent so much time with her that, you know, we've kind of like absorbed a bit of each other, even if I, you know, kind of wasn't funneling myself in there.
And it's becoming you.
At least a bit. Yeah, exactly. That we've kind of, there's been a bit of a mind meld there for sure. But Anna is for sure like a lot of the hilarious geniuses that I get to share my life and spend time with, you know, that these, I've certainly been extremely lucky in terms of like the friends and colleagues I've had in my life who are brilliant and wonderful and have often been doing extraordinary things with so little and in so many like terrible jobs. So she sort of comes from all of that a little bit, and you know, her story and her trajectory is certainly not exclusively mine, and there are very important points at which we diverge, you know, including like our you know, I don't think my internal moral compass is exactly like Anna's for sure. You know, I don't think that you know, I certainly think there are places in which I had to kind of stretch to find her internal rationale behind like what she was doing and where she was going with the choices that she made. But I'm comfortable saying this is at least medium an autobiography.
Well, hopefully, one of the pivotal scenes for me was when Anna ends up getting pretty brutally injured, in the sense that she's laid up. And I love that you really went into that because she gets into a funk into that. And it leads into one of my favorite things. I love databases and math and the Excel spreadsheets. And I love the whole disaster math that you put into the book.
Oh, amazing,
So
amazing.
the disaster math is real. This is to be totally clear. Elon Noy is a real person. He's an incredible researcher who develops like real world equations that are used to measure the cost of natural disasters on communities. He very generously allowed me to cite his actual research in this book.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's used extensively by international organizations, again, to like, kind of measure exactly how much an earthquake or a tornado costs. And all the math works. The spreadsheets that Anna builds are based on spreadsheets that I have. The calculations that she runs are real. So even though like typically they're used to measure disasters and not superpowers, all the fundamental equations behind the measuring that she does exist and are real.
Is there some Reddit site or something that actually has done this and said, like ranked how much damage heroes or villains have caused?
No, me.
You're doing that.
Yeah. No, that's that. So I did a lot of like core sample research, I guess, on like heroes versus villains. I looked in particular at a lot of the year one comics because they do offer that like vertical slice, like, okay, here's a year of superheroic activity, like what happens. And certainly not like everything is on camera or talked about, but
Right.
I went through a lot of comics, those in particular, but a lot of them, measured exactly how many injuries, including like what those specific injuries were, how many deaths and how much property damage the villains and the heroes caused, and measured, like ran the equations, measured it, and it is hilarious how different like the heroes versus the villains are, even if you count what the villains were trying to do. But when you look at, and it's like, okay, your plot was foiled, like whatever, but assume you had been successful, like assume you had like vaporized all that gold and like, whatever, like this is how much it cost. The damage the hero does stopping that is always so much worse in everything that I measured. So like, for example, like Batman does something like 480 plus life years of damage in the year one Batman comics, whereas Scarecrow does one a year, and that is stretching it. That's like, well, this person may have needed some pretty extensive therapy, so like I'm assuming they, like over the course of their lifespan, maybe they lost a year's worth of productivity. Like I rounded up to find that number. So and the conclusions that Anna comes to are, for sure are very conspiracy theory-y in some ways, right? Like, and is certainly like the work she does is the product of obsession that, comes out of this like really profound wrongs that are done to her, certainly. But all of her math is real and all of her findings are real in that they are based on the kind of damage that heroes do in comics.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I can run this math on any comic or superhero media you would like.
For hire, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a service I now provide. I can't turn it off, unfortunately. It makes it like really hard to say like play the new Avengers game. It's just like, well, like I'm just, watching Thor murder people. Just like doing like counting in my head as like all these poor hench people are just like obviously blown to pieces.
That could be a little bit of a buzzkill if you're just.
It's a bit of a bummer. Yeah, I'm real fun at parties now.
Yeah.
Like, let me pull out my charts and tell you why Batman is terrible.
Let me tell you why the Avengers Endgame was not good.
Yeah. I mean, like, to be clear, I also cried during Endgame, like, because I am not a robot, it turns out, and I do experience human emotions. But the vast majority of the time, like if you look at the damage, like it is not look good for most heroes.
I wanted to transition from that. Jason was talking about how much he loved that the first scene when Anna was with her previous employer, who we both agreed that we love in an odd way. The electric eel.
Terrible.
He's really terrible. You said that you might have a little tiny piece prepared from that to read as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a wee bit from a scene where Anna has been working for a kind of like B tier villain called the Electric Eel, who's awful, and this is her first sort of experience with field work. Okay, everyone, the woman with the call sheet said, clapping her hands for a moment of attention. Remember, your job is to make your boss more impressive. Loom, but don't mean mug too hard. Try to project some intensity, but take your cues from E and don't go overboard. You're like evil bridesmaids. You're here to make him look even better. The meat behind me grumbled at the comparison, and I fought against another smile. I tried to project a sense of menace. I indulged in some revenge fantasies and hoped that they carried to my face. We're live in 10, the camera operator called, and then continued to count down on his fingers. E sat a little straighter on his makeshift throne. He dramatically steepled his fingers and allowed one corner of his mouth to quirk up the slightest bit. I found myself suddenly gripped by nervousness. With a final thumbs up, we were live. Mr. Mayor, councilors, Chief Danchuk, pardon me for interrupting this municipal session on, what was it, public transit? E paused a moment, mentally counting out a few seconds to allow for the sounds of shock and outrage he imagined had erupted on the other side of the closed-circuit channel he'd invaded. Please, I promise not to take up too much of your time. At the bottom of the screen, there's a crypto wallet address. There's a very simple ransom demand, the equivalent of $5 million, delivered within the next 5 minutes. Nothing outrageous, nothing that would bankrupt the civic purse, just a little nest egg to get my next project off the ground. E glanced meaningfully across the room where 2 of his bodyguards had been standing by the door. One of them nodded and touched his earpiece, barking a quick command. The other held the doors open. A third man walked in, bigger than any of the other meat, half dragging and half carrying a long-limbed teen boy with him. The kid had grass stains on his knees and was wearing a jersey emblazoned with the logo of a donut shop. He must have been grabbed from soccer practice. As the thick-necked man holding him dragged the boy closer to the desk, I could smell the salt of his fresh sweat and a high note of panic. One of the kid's feet was bare, and it looked like his own sock had been stuffed into his mouth. One of the meat behind me kicked me in the back of the leg, and I realized that my mouth had been hanging open. I struggled to compose my face. Of course, I understand that you need some incentive for such a business proposition, so let me provide it, along with a little demonstration of the new project I'm working on, he said jovially, gesturing the meat closer. He dragged the boy into the frame of the camera. He paused again for a reaction he couldn't see on the other side of the video feed, then plucked the sock out of the boy's mouth. The kid shook his head and spat. We'd like to thank Jeremy for volunteering for this demonstration. He stood. He picked up the mood ring and set it humming, much louder this time. I could feel it in my teeth. Jeremy, your dad is watching, so try and put on a good show for him. I'm very excited you were able to help us out. Where's my dad? Jeremy's voice was a lot higher than I expected. He pointed to the camera. Your father can see you, Jeremy, but I'm afraid you can't see him. Now, answer me this. How do you feel, Jeremy? Would you say that your emotional state is like currently? Jeremy attempted to kick the meat, holding him in the foot while still wearing a cleat. Let me go. E nodded, upset. Would you say that that's fair? Jeremy's lip was trembling. He was even younger than I thought he was at first glance. What I'd originally taken for a skinny 14 was probably more like a tall 12. He was close enough to me now that I could see the scabs on his knees and the dirt under his fingernails. I was struck at once by how vulnerable this poor kid was, and the fact I was standing almost directly behind him while we were live broadcasting his kidnapping. The room swam, and suddenly I felt like I was going to barf. Which is how I would feel if I suddenly found myself party to a kidnapping whilst on Zoom.
Absolutely. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
That leads into one of my favorite scenes. So,
yeah, it goes very badly, I think, for almost everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Which leads me, it's interesting to me on that because that's where you get to meet some of the superheroes later on. for the first time. And what I found interesting is I love the names, like Electric Eel, obviously perfect, like minor villainy name. But
kind of
like,
slimy, you know.
yeah, I mean, just the way he talked to her at her desk when she was working, you know, kind of inappropriate but slimy. Yeah. How long did you work on some of these names? Some of these names are just really clever. And how did you pair them with their superpowers? And did you ever make a superpower too powerful and you're like, okay, I can't do that. That's outside of Super Collider, obviously.
This question makes me sound super organized in a way that I don't think I am. A lot of them I chose because they sounded really cool. I have a minor like obsession with CERN and like the idea of the like Hadron Super Collider. I just think it's really, really cool. So I kind of named a lot of the most powerful contemporary superheroes after those kinds of quantum experiments and there is Super Collider, there's quantum entanglement, there's accelerator, and they all kind of come from that like hyper modern like very almost future tech sciencey, whereas a lot of the older heroes like Doc Proton and Entropy are more of a like atomic age feel. It feels like a different kind of like what we thought the future would look like a few decades ago is kind of what I was going for there, is that like what the cutting edge of technology is, or what the kind of like what we imagine the future of technology is, starts to age out in its own kind of weird way. So I wanted the heroes that kind of existed at the current moment to feel like what we think the future will look like, and the heroes that are whose time has sort of like been in past feel a bit like what we thought the future would look like in the past. So there were a few naming conventions like that I definitely like used to cluster the names, but often I would be like, this sounds really cool. I'm gonna name this person that, and then figure out how, like, from that name, figure out like, okay, what do your powers look like? What does your branding look like? What are your superhero teams like? I often use that name as kind of the jumping off point.
Do you have something, Daniel?
I wanted to, well, first of all, you're using a lot of comic book convention. And so we're, one of the things that we were discussing a lot in the store, and a wonderful listener, reader, watcher, JL Visser asked as well about, did you conceive of this as a series? Is there a sequel involved?
That's a great question. I definitely wrote Hench with doors open, or at least wrote the ending with doors open. But it was important to me that it also like hang together as a complete story. So when I wrote it as a book, but I wrote it with as a story arc that concludes, but could also continue. I would love there to be a sequel. That sounds great. I'm definitely actively thinking about and working towards a sequel, but whether that, whether that it ends up happening is still like, I don't know what the future holds in terms of my publishing future at all. But I'd love to spend more time with these characters. I'd love to spend more time in this universe. Like, I think there's a lot there. I think there's a lot left to explore. So I hope so.
Well, we're trying to work on making sure you get a sequel.
I appreciate that.
Jason is a crazed series reader, and I am the anti-series person. So, but I read a lot of first books in series, and so I know, like, especially in the kid world, like, you have basically, you try to keep a complete arc on the first book, and it's only when they say second, you've got a 5-book series that then when you get to the end of the second book, you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, well, like whatever the next book is gonna. Second books are hard, man, for a bunch of reasons. Like sophomore slump is a real thing. It's not just a thing that happens to bands, right? Like it's definitely a difficult thing for writers to. Also, like while The Two Towers is my favorite of the Lord of the Rings movies because I love a good siege, middles of stories are hard, right? Because like they're all. Everything is in progress and everything is moving and you don't get to kind of like tie things up neatly, right? Like there's, even if for the parts in the story that are their own complete arcs, to kind of be carrying something through them from the very beginning to the very end, that middle book has to do a lot of like heavy lifting that will pay off later, but does not pay off within the kind of structure of that book. So it's like, I can kind of see the future and I know that the next one is going to be very hard because of that heavy lifting. But I really hope I get to do it, I really hope that like I get to meet that challenge. I think it would be really, really fun.
We would all love to see that as well.
Thank you.
But that's why Jason he'll read a first book, but sometimes he reads the second and third together.
Yeah,
and I think that's
I
why.
understand that. I think that like the second and third are easier to kind of write in parallel too, because you have to kind of know like what for the second to work, like you need to know what the like later payoffs will be. Or fourth, right? Like, the Wayfarer series is 4 books long as opposed to 3. I know like 3 is a kind of like classic high fantasy arc, but that doesn't mean it has to be confined to that, certainly. But it still is that kind of like, you need, by the second book, you really need to know what your final payoff is, because it has to do so much of that like big industrial narrative carrying.
I'm glad to hear that you're already thinking about it, because we're all, I would also say that some of the questions I got, the question that Daniel had there about more books, they were also talking about, do you think this would ever be a movie or a TV show? And if you
that would be cool, right? Like, trust me, I am open to that possibility. Like, like, please, some streaming service drive a dump truck of money to my house. I am prepared. My body is ready. So I think it would be rad. It's definitely one of the greater compliments I've gotten is that it feels very cinematic, and that like folks think it would make a rad show. I think that would be really, really neat. I'm still kind of trying to like adjust my dreams upwards for like how this book will do, as the reception has been super warm. I promise surprising no one more than me. So yeah, that would just be the coolest thing in the entire world. I'd love it if it was.
We're not going to talk about the thing that Jason loved so much and I was so horrified by, but I will say one of the things, so everybody has to read it to know what it is, because it's horrifying and also amazing. But what I just want to say is, when I was reading it, I had to say to myself, okay, I would be afraid to watch this, but I almost need to watch it because I have to figure out exactly what happened.
Like, what is happening? So I think it's fair to say at several periods in the book, including the one you were both referencing, there is a not insignificant amount of body horror. Because I think I said, a bit earlier, the interaction between a superheroic body and a normal squishy body, inherently horrifying proposition, right? And that one is extremely strong and one is extremely fragile and made of meat. And when you throw those things together, it's often very bad. Superpowers themselves, however, and like, the idea of superheroes is, I think, something that's has a very rich horror potential, and in particular, like very rich, like body horror potential. There's lots of potential for extremity there, and sort of exploring the like, the limits of human endurance, and what, like what it means to have a body, and what does the like super heroic, abject look like are things I'm really interested in. Because it's, you know, I have intrusive thoughts, so I have to do something with this, and now you have this before you. Haha.
Oh yeah. Well, I think also in reading this book, when with your going off of that is I've always thought that if I had had superpowers,
Mm-hmm.
like I think that it'd be nice to think that I'd be a good person.
Mm-hmm.
But
Wouldn't it?
I kind of feel like, you know, the old axiom that once you get power, it corrupts you. And I've read a lot about this. Now, it feels like you're talking about. It could be very contemporary, and I know Daniel was talking to me about this before, and he's very excited. So maybe I'll let him explain this.
Oh no. I'm not going to steal this, but we were talking about the contempt how. It's just such an eye-opening book looking at a different way about power. It has so much contemporary resonance, which I'm, maybe you didn't realize how much it had when you were writing it, but you certainly were aware of some. Would you talk a little about that?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Real world.
So, yeah. It is definitely not your imagination that there are like real connections. But there is a siren in the background, which is like.
Some villain.
The writing of this moment is like really quite bad. Like, you know what I mean? Like the cliche that just occurred right now is like, really, universe? Whoever is writing this series of Earth is just like gone totally off the rails. But you're not imagining it. It's definitely present in the book. It's definitely something I thought a lot about. The kind of like corruption of power that I wanted to engage with was less about personal power, although for sure that's there, but is also very deeply about institutional power. Even if you want to be a good person and you believe that you are a good person and you think that your internal compass is in the right place, if you are working in the service of an unjust institution, you cannot be good. It is impossible because you are upholding the values of something profoundly unjust. And this is something that like a lot of the super heroic characters in the book, deal with very directly, that like they believe they are doing good. They are trying to make the world a better place, but in supporting and we're basically like working through the institution of like oppressive government agencies and what is essentially like a police state. They are doing vastly more damage to the people in the communities that they are there to protect than good at the end of the day. So if you are using your personal power, whether that is great or little, to, support an institution that is at its heart terrible, right? And evil and broken, you cannot be good and you cannot be doing good. And I don't think that it is at all a stretch of the imagination to say that this is like directly pointed at real world policing institutions. Like I have not been a fan of cops for a very long time, so that it is not at all imagination that is in this book, and the fact that it feels very real and very contemporary and very pointed is certainly like coincidental in terms of like this is a conversation a lot of people are having right now, but it's definitely a conversation that I wanted this book to be having from the time that I started writing it very seriously.
Yeah, I mean the superheroes almost appear like the armored tanks, excess tanks or body armor that
totally
that the police are sold by the government, in the United States anyway.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I'm in Toronto. It's not, it's different, but it's not like that different.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the superheroes kind of take ownership that they can go wherever they want to go.
And are protected, right? Like they have a whole institution that does PR for them, right? That the idea of heroism is a very powerful shield, right? Like if you believe you are a hero and therefore anything you do is heroic and good, right? That you, of course, you believe that you're right all of the time, regardless of, the reality of what you are doing at any particular moment.
Yeah. Jason, you still have a lot of questions.
I still have a lot of questions?
Don't you? I saw them. It was a long list.
I have a lot of just like random things. They're just
Random's good?
I love random questions.
Well, I was going to talk, like, you were very specific, like Anna's injury, very specific about how she fractured her leg. And I wanted to know, did you ever have that particular fracture? Because it was such a spiral fracture is so, painful and so, specific that I thought, well, this feels like it's coming from a personal thing, maybe?
I have not personally experienced a spiral fracture.
Okay.
I experience chronic pain in different ways, but I have the specific injury that Anna has, I have not experienced. However, I did a lot of research. I get is being I wish being like an amateur doctor was a thing, in the Wild West, kind of like doctor, barber, whatever, like you got ghosts in your blood, do cocaine about it kind of way, because I think I would rule at being that kind of a doctor.
You can still do it.
Yeah, sure.
Neuropathy. There's all kinds of options.
Lots of different ways to do things, like field set a bone, it's fine. So I'm very interested in medical science as a thing. And I definitely did a lot of research into what would be an injury that would have, lifelong consequences, right? That would take a very long time to heal from, that can happen very quickly, that is the sort of thing somebody in a car accident or in a high impact injury situation could and probably would get, just because of the encounter, what kind of injuries could Anna potentially suffer based on the sort of way that scene goes. And I settled on the spiral fracture because it was something that she would not have to be hospitalized long for, probably, but that would require very serious medical intervention, would take a very long time to recover from, would probably be something she'd never fully recover from. And, would be something that from a trauma perspective, both, physically and emotionally, she'd be processing for a very long time. I also have a colleague and friend of mine who did suffer a spiral fracture. She got hers while doing CrossFit, of all things. Just jumped on a box and her leg shattered all the way up. And her recovery, she wrote really beautifully and eloquently about her recovery, and her what that process looked like and what kind of her healing looked like. And I was certainly very inspired by that as this is the kind of difficulty in recovery that was something that fit the situation I needed Anna to go through to get where she goes.
Yeah, it definitely reads that way. Daniel?
Well, one of the things about the book is that let me just say, my reading taste is, this was I was the seventh person to read the book. So, but I read a lot of comic books as a kid, and I've read lots of genre stuff, especially when everybody gets excited. So I'm not going to be the person who jumps in first, but I'll be the last one in the pool. And one of the things of what I found is that in a lot of comics and that there is, whether it's targeted to men or women or other, there's often a romantic element. And one of the things I found interesting about your book is that while Anna is starved for sort of romantic fulfillment, she doesn't get it. Like you kind of keep it away. Like, and maybe that's part of the series thing, but like she has sort of interest in both men and women, and neither of those really go anywhere. And it feels like that was an interesting thing because I kept thinking, about the limo driver or her coworker. I was like, when is this gonna happen? You're devious. Another way you're devious.
Thank you. So I am extremely bad at any kind of like romantic attention. Like I don't understand it. I'm really bad at processing it. Like I'm super awkward. Dating is like my worst nightmare. Like, and by dating,
you do
I mean,
a good
like,
bad date in the book. You
oh
do
yeah,
a really
there,
good
yeah,
bad
yes,
date.
it comes from a real place. I assure you. Like the idea of going on dates, which is basic, like in the sort of like classic hetero way, which is like, let's have a job interview, but for bad sex. Like, I just never want that to happen to me. Like I'm whatever, I'm in my 30s and I'm just like 3000% done with ever wanting that to occur. So for sure, a bit of that is there. Also, like I made the decision to focus on primarily non-romantic relationships in this book because non-romantic relationships are just as important as romantic ones, right? Like I'm not, especially from a narrative perspective, like I'm not really invested in romantic primacy. Like I don't think that like, that like you're supposed to find only one person and like be with them for the rest of your life, like you get married when you're 18 or whatever, like that. None of that makes sense to me. That has definitely not looked like at all the trajectory of my life and experiences, nor the life and experiences of most people in my communities. But I really wanted to dig into like what are some really deep and profound friendships and work relationships, and what like how and like mentor relationships, and what does what do like those power imbalances look like in non-romantic ways, which isn't to say that the book is devoid of romance either, and there certainly is also a lot of love there. It just doesn't look like the kind of romantic arc I think we see a lot of the time, which is also very straight, right? Like, which is also very like, it comes from a very particular kind of romantic structure. And I didn't want to explore exclusively that. I mean, that said, like, I would love for Anna to have the kind of connection that like I think she would really like to have with potentially several people in the book.
All of them.
Maybe all, right? Like, turns out everyone is hot. Like a piece of feedback or criticism that I've gotten a couple of times is like, why does Anna just like awkwardly think everyone is attractive? I'm like, I see, I have I have revealed a thing about myself that perhaps I am uncomfortable with. Strange. Like, everybody has the potential to be attractive. Weird. That's not a thing everybody feels, Make a mental note of that for perhaps the future. But like I would love for her to have those experiences, but it also needs to like narratively make sense, and it also needs to like be a thing that she as a character is ready for, right? Like, and I think that the kind of period of time that we see her is one where she's going through like a huge amount of internal change, a ton of change in terms of like her career and her career's trajectory. The like people she is close to are shifting really dramatically. She loses and has to process the loss of like very significant relationships over the course of the book. And so it was never the right moment for her to kind of make that, not just romantic, but in particular, like sexual connection, like just within the events of this book. I hope her future is different. But I haven't written that book yet, so we'll see how that goes.
The friendship, I mean, her relationship with June is, I mean, it's heartbreaking sometimes, but it's just, you can tell how important that friendship is. And also the mentor, her mentor with her supervillain. And yeah, and then the pilot, I was trying to visualize, you have a lot of robotics involved, and and I was sort of like, how does that, maybe I don't want to know how that sex goes anyway. But
I mean, I do, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, I am for sure profoundly curious about how a lot of that is going to work. I have not yet figured that out yet, but I will assure you that, like, in addition to several tabs about like teledildonics, there's also like a lot of tabs open in my Chrome right now that are like research about how insects enjoy sex or not. So who knows? I have scientific questions that I need answered.
Plumbing attractions. Well,
Yeah.
I can tell, obviously somebody who celebrates the database administrator as the heroine, the hero of the story, I should say, obviously is interested in a little research.
For science.
Jason, do you want to, we don't have any questions in our, if you do have a question, just send it in chat or Q&A. Jason, do you want to do another question though? I know you do have more.
Well, I just actually have a more of a curiosity question.
Sure.
What is it like? I mean, you don't have anything to compare to, though you did publish poetry a number of years ago. What is it like being a debut author and doing all these virtual events in the middle of COVID?
Man, this is not how I thought that was gonna go, eh? like I don't know how to answer this question. It's super weird, man. Like, it's super, super weird. When I sold the book and when we started doing, it sold like 18 months ago or something, like last April. We were talking about like what a tour would look like through major cons, right? We're like, well, probably we'll want to launch it at Comic-Con, right? And probably we'll want to like do like a big Dragon Con event, and like, you're going to be doing all these panels, and like, what do you want to physically attend was like a huge part of it. And we were, sort of just starting to poke at like what a tour would look like when, turns out none of us is ever traveling or leaving our houses again, probably, like that. It was a huge shift for, I think, me and everybody. It's a weird thing to process, like, and for sure there was a period when it was hard not to feel like really deeply disappointed that I wouldn't be able to go. 'Cause I've been attending cons for years, right? Like, I'm, as a game designer, I've been to like, I've been to PAX, and I've been to GDC, and like I've spoken at panels on panels at Dragon Con before, and like I've done a lot of big and small conferences, and I love them. And so not being able to do that and go and be like present in fandom as a fan more than anything else is really hard, for sure. I mean, that said, this, the book has been out for like a week and a half or something, and it has been absolutely wild already. And the reception has been mind-blowingly positive so far. So it's really hard to have any bad feelings about that, even though like, it's extremely surreal, and I have yet to have to put on pants for like any event that I have done, theoretically. Also very strange. It's also been really great, and being able, and I've been able to do more because I haven't had to like physically go a place, right? Like I like my partner, I set up a really amazing like streaming studio in our living room, and now I get to do this here, and that's really rad, and I get to have a lot more conversations than I probably would have gotten to otherwise, like if I had to travel to go do them. So yeah, it's very surreal. It's for sure very surreal, but it's also been so positive, I kind of can't complain about it.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't have gone to Milwaukee, but every so often
I might have.
Yeah, it is funny about, first of all, we can sometimes get you added on to Chicago because it's really close. And the other thing is,
like
sometimes publishers see Wisconsin, oh, that's close to Canada. So we actually get more Canadian authors than you'd expect.
That's
just
funny.
because they're they do like the Buffalo, Detroit, Milwaukee, Minneapolis home.
Right. Yeah. I grew up in Windsor, so like
Oh,
that ring is for sure like very easy.
You know it.
I know it. I am familiar with it, and I totally would go.
We have a bunch of questions from Jennifer's. So I'm going to, just because we're getting a little closer to the end, I'm going to read you all of them. You can answer any or all.
Great.
So from the Steele and DeVisser Jennifer department. First of all, which character was your favorite? Right, and don't say Anna. Second of all, which one did you really want to kill off? And third one was, what characters were there characters whose roles expanded as you rewrote the book? Mm-hmm. Or maybe even was there a character that was there that disappeared? So disappearing person,
right.
Which is a bad super anything. And
the disappearing person is actually that kind of a funny title now that you say it.
Well, it sort of reminds. I was a big Legion of Superheroes person when I was young.
Yeah.
And the supervillains, mm-hmm. and the substitutes who had very bad powers, and the pets. I always like to tell. I can recite all the Legion of Super Pets. But so somebody said, so it did remind me a little of shrinking. All shrinking characters.
Mm.
But and then another question about changing the cast. So talk about characters.
Talk about the cast, sure. A character who both really surprised me and whose role definitely expanded is Keller, whom I love. I introduced him as kind of a like minor early antagonist. Like I really thought he and Anna would hate each other. And they very much surprised me by like kind of getting along like a house on fire once they like individually got over their shit. And so he ended up being a really important friend and like and a very important like source of advice and comfort and somebody to like process really hard stuff with in a way that I did not expect. So, his sort of, but that wasn't really like a second draft. That was like, as I was writing the thing, like he became a very different person than I thought he would. And the role he occupied like really grew and expanded and became, that relationship became something very different. I did not cut a character that I can think of. It's a pretty like, it's a very large and varied cast for sure, because like, again, like when you're talking about hench people, you have a lot of people who like, you don't really know what their job is, and you see them at like a handful of meetings maybe, and like they hand you a clipboard and then they're gone forever. Just because I wanted it to feel very much like a workplace where like there's some people over there who we don't really know, and there's some people who are really important for a little while, and then kind of like you get promoted and you don't see them as much. So the cast is pretty big because a lot of people have to fill different roles just like within the organization as well as within Anna's life. So there wasn't anybody who disappeared. There were certainly characters who transformed a little bit in terms of like what, like I didn't know Melinda would come back after her like very first appearance at the temp agency, for example. But it's like, actually this person is rad, right? Like I want to know who this like hot butch stunt driver is. Like I must know. She must return. And so I just like wrote her back in because I was definitely fascinated by like her whole business and decided she needed to come back. So often I would kind of like make people up and then like them so much I kind of had to expand.
It's like you get a bit part in a series and then you become a recurring role because of the
exactly. It's like, wait a minute, no, you were great. And also like, isn't that the whole project of Hench was like, I want to know who these people are. They're all awesome, right? Yeah. So they kind of like became my eggs that I was hoarding. I'm like, these are all my hatchlings who I will protect, like a mother dragon. But yeah, so there wasn't anybody who kind of disappeared. If anything, the cast kind of like expanded in really interesting ways. It is really hard to pick a non-Anna favorite between Quantum Entanglement and Leviathan. They are both really cool, and they're the two characters whose relationships with Anna and Anna's relationship with them that I want to explore probably the most. Like, I think there are like really interesting and complicated places that both of those relationships can go, and I don't quite know the shape either or both of those relationships are going to take yet. So like, I'm kind of obsessively fascinated with both of them and like what that can kind of look like.
And we should say that Leviathan is the supervillain that Anna goes to.
Yes, yeah.
And that Quantum Entanglement is a super heroine, I guess. You know, she's on the hero side, but
yeah, she certainly is for a bit there. But her position is like who she ended up being was changed quite a bit as well. You know, she was definitely one of those characters who like who I thought she would be and who she ended up being were quite different. Her arc probably changed the most in terms of like my first draft to my final draft. Like, and she definitely has the most stuff going on off screen that is actually important to the narrative, right? Like Super Collider for sure is doing like a bunch of superheroic garbage over here the whole time that we don't necessarily need to see beyond like tiny glimpses of news stories or whatever. But Quantum kind of does the most stuff that Anna is not aware of, you know, sort of like her story is the most limited by Anna's perspective. Just like there's no way for her to know what's going on in Quantum's life for most of the book. And so for that reason alone, I like really want to spend more time with her and dig into that.
You also do, I mean, she's such an interesting look at like the patriarchy of superhero culture as well.
And I hope like a kind of a colonial look as well, you know, and in a very like, you know, Quantum's life, I guess, and I don't want to give really anything away here, but is very much not what she thought it was going to be, and I think the kind of like profound disillusionment that she experiences over the course of the novel, but certainly over like the last decade that she has been like working as a superhero, and certainly as a superhero like on this continent, has been extremely difficult and draining for her. And I think that, you know, that journey alone is extremely interesting. But she's definitely somebody who's been like profoundly failed by like patriarchal superhero, we live in a society kind of garbage. And that's the state in which you find her is somebody who's been failed by very much by the institutions that she is still upholding when we find her.
Well, and I think that's the great thing about your novel is that these characters have such complex issues and flaws and strengths, and they all grow over the course of this book. They all grow and develop. And so it's great that you like Quantum Entanglement because she was one of my favorites.
I really like her. She's got a lot going on. I mean, people are weird and complicated, right? Like we all have like trauma and baggage and are trying to do good things and are also really like petty, and you know, everybody's weird. Everybody's weird and complicated. And I think that's great. And I think that like superheroes are very allegorical, right? They're very much archetypes. They're like human beings who are really just ideas walking around and clothed in human flesh, right? Like they're often not, they don't get to be people. They get to be like justice personified or revenge personified or whatever. They're more about the idea than that they represent than the person, which like you don't really have to go further than their name to see how this works. But I really wanted to put the humanity back into those characters and say like, this is not about the idea or the concept. It's about like the person. And when you try and reduce a person to an idea, you're actually doing a spectacular amount of damage to them in the process.
We have one question left, maybe it'll be our closing question. It's from the Society of the Jennifers. Yes, you heard it right. Every single person who's asked a question has been a Jennifer.
Whoa.
So this Jennifer 3 has to say, love the book. And since you're not working on that sequel yet, you have the ideas. What are you working on now?
So I'm working on a bunch of things. I'm writing a fake true crime podcast. So it appears to be a true crime podcast, then like monsters or ghosts or whatever. So that's really fun for me. I'm working with a few collaborators on a like optimistic post-apocalyptic game. Like there was for sure a cataclysm a bunch of years ago, but like we're fine now. It's like Waterworld, but with agriculture and restorative justice. So working on that, that's really fun. I'm also writing, I'm part of a program called Remote Realities, which is a partnership between a couple of cool games organizations in the city here. And I'm a collaborator and I am Max Lander are building a like a role-playing game that is kind of a gesture toward like mail chess, like as in like played through the post, where it's a role-playing game designed to be played asynchronously. So you like, I do a part, then I send it to my co-player and they do a part and we're kind of sending it back and forth. So it's like a RPG you can't play at the same time. That is, you know, sort of about like spies and documentation and being weird. So those are some of the things that I'm working on because I don't enjoy resting very much. And making a lot of notes toward a potential sequel.
We think you should just start writing it because we're going to pick it up.
just like throw down, yeah.
Well, we'll just convince Daniel that he has to help. If Morrow doesn't do anything, Daniel will make sure that it happens.
Jason, would you like to close out the evening?
On that note.
Well, thank you for coming and doing the interview. And
oh man, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
We're thrilled. We're so excited to be selling this book. We're selling it. We're discounting the book now. We sent the people a link. We'll have a video up to share if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Cool. The beauty of interviews is everyone's different. So
for sure, and your enthusiasm sustains me both like literally and symbolically. This positive energy is like the fuel that will keep me going through the darkness of the plague times.
So we and the Society of Jennifers will uphold Hench.
Thank you, Jennifer Collective. I imagine you as a single consciousness, united now.
They do have brain merge.
Like a hive mind, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And we wouldn't have a virtual bookstore without you. Hope to see another event, and hope you get to do lots more because you're delightful and wonderful. And
thank you.
So.
Shucks.
Much success in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night,
everybody.